OLED. That was just to appease the people who complained that during my unboxing video, not review, I only turned the screen on maybe once or twice, as if they'd be able to see what it looks like through a camera, through YouTube's encoding, on their screen. I don't understand it either, but it is what it is. Now, as with last time, this Steam Deck OLED was sent to me for free by Valve. However, they have not paid me in any way to do this coverage, and they have no creative control over what I say. All of my opinions here are my own opinions. Also, apologies for the flickering. I have no idea how to record a screen well, so for now, we're going to turn this back off. I've been with the Steam Deck OLED for maybe about a week now. I've been playing a bunch of games with it, and I feel like I've got my general thoughts put together. Now, as I never did a video on the original Steam Deck, I'm also going to include my general Steam Deck thoughts as well, along with my thoughts about the OLED specific things. So, let's get started. Before even turning on the screen, the first thing that grabs my attention is the controller. Now, it doesn't matter how it looks. The important thing is how it feels. And I think the best way to put it is competent, but not perfect. Now, I've been really clear about what my favorite controllers are. Right now, it is the PS5 controller and the Xbox One Series X controller. Now, this is basically the same as the old Xbox One controller with some very minor changes, but putting the repairability aside, which is just good on the Steam Deck, like there's no argument against that. This thing is really easy to repair. These things, kind of terrible. I prefer the way they feel, but I don't think the Steam Deck is entirely bad. After a very long time, Microsoft finally figured out the D-pad thing. While it's still the circle D-pad, it actually has a nice clicky feel, and the Steam Deck OLED is the same. I have no complaints whatsoever about that. Same with the face buttons. Obviously, they're a little bit smaller because of the smaller area to work with, but they feel as good as basically anything else. But for my first maybe hour or so of gaming, there was something really throwing me off. I kept missing the face buttons. I kept missing the D-pad. And then I realized what the issue was. The sticks are in line, as opposed to the PlayStation controller where they're both below, or the Xbox controller where you have the offset sticks. Now, this is not a bad thing, and with the more confined space you have to work with on the Steam Deck, it's really the only way you could make it functionally work without making the Steam Deck, much longer. It's not a problem, but it is going to take a little bit of time to get used to, especially if you've been using a controller for a really long time. Something that is more of a problem are the triggers and bumpers. Now, they're not unusably bad, but I would like to see some very minor improvements. So on the Xbox controller, if we press this, and we're not actually fully pressing, we're just tapping our finger on it, this thing does not move until you properly click it. Now with the Steam Deck, there is this really weird wobble here. I'm not pressing the button, it's just moving the entire plastic. Same with the other side. This is just the way it works. Now when you click it in, it feels fine to click, but why is there this little wobble? It's not like that exists on the PlayStation controller either. There's wobble side to side because it's not the tightest thing, but if you want to press it, it doesn't move until you press it. As for the triggers, I feel like they're just a little bit too light. It's not like they feel mushy, but compared to the Xbox controller, Microsoft knows exactly what they're doing. These are considerably heavier and feel really, really good. Sony finally worked out how to do it with their L2 and R2 buttons. These are definitely lighter than what Microsoft does, but they feel really, really good. I feel like a couple of extra grams of force could really, really improve the trigger experience with the Steam Deck. As I said, maybe it's a me thing and nobody else cares, but I think it could be nice to see. The more annoying thing is related to the trackpad, not the trackpads themselves. The trackpads feel genuinely incredible. I didn't know how I would feel scrolling around using the trackpads. After maybe 10, 15 minutes, it felt fine. I learned what I needed to learn. Scrolling with the left side also feels fine. I have no complaints there. And the haptics, if you told me there were no haptics here, and when you clicked, you were actually moving this plastic down and there was a physical click, I would believe you. It feels that good. In the trackpads. Now, the haptics are used for another thing. When you click down the triggers, there is some slight haptic feedback emulating a physical click. And you know what? It feels genuinely terrible because there is no haptic engine in the triggers themselves. It is using the haptic engine from the trackpads. So it feels like it's a click coming from really far away because it's a click coming from really far away. Now, there is a simple way to disable it. Kind of. If we press the Steam button and then go down to the settings section, go down to controller, there's this option called Steam Haptics. This will disable these. It also disables the haptics on the trackpad. Now, if there is a way to disable these two separately, I don't know where it is, because it's not in here, and it's not under the haptic settings. Like, if there is a setting, it's not where it should be. As for the sticks, I can't comment on the original material, but they're supposed to have changed the material to something that's a bit less slippery so your thumbs don't slide off as much. And it's not bad. It also could be better. I think, once again, both the Xbox and the PS5 controllers do a lot better job here. And what they do a better job at is having a slightly rough material so that it's a bit harder to slide off. You can probably tell with the reflection of the light here, that is kind of slick. And it does kind of feel like it. Now, you've got these ridges around the edge, so it's not like your thumbs are just sliding off constantly, but you are going to have to be readjusting pretty often if you want your thumbs to be where you want them to be. Speaking of slick, when I game, I get fairly sweaty hands. And one thing I really appreciate about these two is they both have a kind of rough material along their grips that makes it really, really easy to hold. The PS5 is a little bit less rough than I would like, but they both have a rough material. Now, you would think the Steam Deck has that as well, because, you know, you can see this seam here, so that's a perfect point to change to another material. Well, the plastic used here is the plastic used here is the plastic used here. Actually, I think this plastic on the back might be a bit different, but the plastic on the bit where you hold does not have a rougher material. I would really, really appreciate that on another revision, a Steam Deck 2, or anything like that. Now, I know you can buy third-party skins that will address that problem, but I shouldn't need to buy a third-party skin when it's kind of standard now to do a rougher material. It may not be a problem for anyone, but if you're like me, just keep that in mind. You should probably wipe your hands down. One thing I really don't like about a lot of modern video games is they have excessively small text, and when you have something the size of the Steam Deck, that can be a problem. Luckily, there is a way to deal with that. If we press L1 and the Steam button, and we can move around with our trackpad, it has a built-in zoom. Now, I have noticed it's a little bit flaky, and yeah, now it's locked into zoom mode. If we press it again, now it jumps out. Like, it's a little bit buggy and sometimes it doesn't work, but if you just press it a couple of times, it's super useful to have. A game that is notoriously bad for that is Armored Core 6. And on that note, that is probably the most intensive game I've tried to play on the Steam Deck. Right now you should be seeing some demo on the screen, and these are the default settings it's trying to run at. And it's running not, you know, incredibly well, but well enough to be playable, and you could tweak the settings a bit, make it look a little bit worse, get a better frame rate, and maybe get pretty close to that 90 Hz. Now, for me personally, this is not the kind of game I'd be playing on the Steam Deck in the first place. I just don't like Armored Core 6 on a controller, but I've been playing a lot of Yakuza Kiwami, and this plays absolutely perfectly. If I wanted to play something like Tales of Iron or Loop Hero or Risk of Rain 2 or Ori, like, these are games that are considerably lighter, and the Steam Deck absolutely crushes them. I'm going to use this as a PS2 emulation box. I want to play like Dragon Quest VIII, for example. I want to go back and play Drakengard. For games like that, this thing will absolutely crush it. Now, I'm going to do a full dedicated video on the desktop mode, but the TLDR is it basically feels like Plasma 5.27, but with a mobile style interface. The trackpads, as I mentioned before, feel really, really good. But obviously, typing on this is going to be like typing on a phone. Like, it's a bit nicer because of the trackpads. You can, easily type across this with both fingers at once. But if you want to do any actual typing, you want to, install something from the terminal, you want to plug in a keyboard. But for basic things like searching the web and tweeting, like, that's good enough. Or, searching for something in your menu over here. And when the gamepad is set to desktop mode, things like the D-pad will act as your arrow keys. So you can easily navigate around most menus. Now, some things don't, respect the arrow keys, but things like this absolutely do. It might not seem intuitive, but if you press the left trigger, it opens the right-click menu. That does seem a little bit weird, but you'd be surprised how quickly you get used to pressing it. Now, I want to talk about my experience with the screen. Obviously, what you're seeing right now is the worst possible representation of it. But before I get to that, I want to give you a message from Joshua Ashton, who is involved in working on HDR for Valve, who corrected something I said in my prior video. We are using our own kernel APIs in SteamOS for HDR with Shaper plus 3D LUTs, and everything is done at scanout. HDR comes at zero cost from the game to the display. The only thing that uses slightly more power when doing is the extra brightness, which is in the milliwatt range and barely has any real-world impact, given the high-end brightness is mostly for highlights. TLDR, HDR on Deck OLED has zero cost to performance and near zero cost to battery life. So if you want to make use of the HDR, go ahead and enable it. There is basically no reason not to. Assuming you like HDR, this device is my absolute first device that has an OLED screen. Now, I've seen OLED screens before. I've been to a store selling TVs. I've seen an OLED TV. But, when you're watching on a TV there, it's kind of hard to get a good impression of it because it's so bright in the room. There's so many other TVs. It's not watching content that you would normally be watching. But this screen looks genuinely incredible. This is by far the best looking screen I currently have in my life. It is not so good that I can't go back to anything else. But if the option arises for a, relatively affordable OLED screen with a high refresh rate, I might have to buy one for my desktop as well. There's really not much to say about 90Hz. I hope we can all agree at this point the argument is just done. Bigger number, better person. If you can drive the screen at 90 FPS, it's just going to play better. Now, if you want to play at a lower frame rate, there is a frame limit under the battery settings. By default, it's obviously going to be set to 90 because that's what the screen can now run at, but you can go all the way down to 10. Why would you go to 10? I don't know, but the option is here. But you might notice when it is 10 FPS, it's 90 Hz. This happens as soon as you get to 45 FPS. So from my understanding, there are issues with dropping the refresh rate below that point. So instead of doing that, it will go with a multiple of the FPS that works out to higher than 45. So if we go down to 10, this is 9 times 10, takes us to 90. But the biggest selling point here is the HDR. Now, a lot of people say that Ori is one of the best experiences for HDR. This should be included with HDR displays. I played the HDR. I did this on stream. Obviously, I did it for about 17 minutes. And maybe this is going to be an unpopular opinion. I don't care about HDR. Don't get me wrong, it looks really good. But to me, it's just another kind of good. The OLED screen really carries it. The OLED screen looks genuinely incredible by itself. For me, the HDR doesn't really add anything. It just looks good in a different way. And then there are games like Armored Core 6, which I honestly feel look a lot worse making use of HDR. I am not a color expert. I cannot comment on why that might be the case, but from my subjective experience as someone who just plays a lot of video games, I am never going to make use of the HDR. It's nice that it's there if there's a game that it looks really good on, but I couldn't tell you to buy it because of that. Speaking of color, Steam Remote Play. I've got the Steam client open on my desktop, and I've got the game installed. If we go to this drop-down arrow and swap from this Steam Deck over to the name of my desktop, and then click the stream button, that just starts working. But it doesn't start working properly. I don't know if this is like a X11 thing or a Linux thing, or I don't know what the deal is, but for some reason, the colors are just really, really oversaturated on the Steam Deck here. But it only happens when I'm in gaming mode. If I open up streaming from the desktop mode, it works exactly like it should be. So, something clearly going on. If you're looking for really nicely put together graphs, you're in the wrong place. But the main game I've been playing is Yakuza Kiwami, and with the 50 watt hour, not megawatt, my bad in the prior video, I've been getting about 5 or so hours of battery life at 90 hertz, around like a middling brightness. I've got it turned down right now because it makes it easier to capture, but around maybe here or so. And I'm getting at least 5 hours, and that's leaving it with maybe like 20 or 30% left. So if you keep running it down, you can get maybe like 5.5, 6. Now, there is no reason to be at max brightness unless you're in like a really, really bright room. This screen gets really bright, and it's kind of hard to look at max brightness. Side note for anyone who imports a Steam Deck, you're probably going to get a charger that looks something like this. Now, by itself, for me, this is basically e-waste. Now, you could get yourself a travel adapter, and that will deal with the problem. Your other option is buying a new charger. Now, chargers these days are pretty standard, but make sure you are getting a PD charger and using the USB-C to USB-C cable, because otherwise, this thing is going to take a long, long time to charge. I had it charging overnight, and it wasn't fully charged. With the PD charger, it took about an hour, hour and a half. Now, I stand by something I said in my prior video. I said the Wi-Fi 6E, which is a new addition to the Steam Deck OLED, is not going to give you 2 to 3 times faster downloads. And people saying, oh, but what about the local game transfers? Alright, I went and tried it, and I'm never going to use that function again because it was slower than just downloading the game. Now, maybe it's just the fact that I have a 250 megabit connection, and maybe for a really slow connection, the transfer is going to be faster. But it doesn't physically make any sense why it would be slower. By all accounts, it should be faster to transfer a game. But it wasn't, and I don't know why. Also, if you are going to do the transfer, you cannot sleep the screen, because if you sleep the screen, it then acts as if the device is no longer on your network, and the transfer stops. So when you reopen it, then it will forget the transfer was supposed to be happening and try to download the game anyway. The last thing I want to talk about is something every Steam Deck user should install. If we go to the 3 dots here, go down to the bottom, we have this thing called Decky. This is Decky Loader. This is a plugin loader for the Steam Deck. Now, I only have one thing here, that being Bluetooth. It is a quick way to get to the Bluetooth settings. Why it's not already in this menu, I don't know. It probably should be. But this has a plugin marketplace, and we can install a bunch of really, really cool things, like the animation changer, which makes it really easy to add new boot and suspend animations. There's already a way to do it. This just simplifies the process. The audio loader, to load in new audio sounds for the entire interface. Auto flat packs, which will require like full access to your Steam Deck, but allows you to update your flat packs directly from the Steam Deck interface, and all these other little things that just make the experience better. Or something like CSS Loader to make a new theme for the Steam Deck. The nice thing about the Steam Deck interface being made in React, that makes it super easy to write CSS for it. Do keep in mind you are installing third-party code, so make sure you're actually checking what you're installing and make sure you don't install something malicious. Whilst this is like a curated marketplace, you can still run into problems. Also, running third-party code, you do run into the possibility of possibly making things less stable. Now, I haven't had any problems myself, but that's not to say that some of the things aren't written really badly. I probably will do a dedicated video on DecuLoader, but I just want to mention that it exists because this is a really, really cool project. And I think that's about everything I wanted to say. Now, it's really hard for me to say whether you should or shouldn't buy a Steam Deck. I was going to buy a Steam Deck, before Valve sent me one. I was going to wait until they're available in Australia and then actually buy one. Then Valve sent me this thing, so it puts me in a weird position. I like the device. I think the device is incredible. And if you were going to buy a Steam Deck anyway, and now you see, hey look, it has an OLED screen, it has Wi-Fi 6E, it has Bluetooth 5.3, it has a bigger battery, it has these slightly nicer sticks. All of these little things about the... It supports HDR now. All of these things. If you're going to buy one anyway, plus with the price reduction, now is the best time to buy one. But outside of some edge cases with really low wattage, the device isn't any faster than the original Steam Deck. So if the performance was still a problem for you, that's still going to be a problem. But for me, I'm happy I have one. From now on, every other Steam Deck video I do is going to be a very practical video. I want to do a video about the desktop experience. I want to do a video about DecuLoader. I want to do a video about the weird UEFI system that this thing is making use of. So if the review and unboxing content isn't, what you've been enjoying, that's totally fine. There's not going to be any more of it. At least on this device. But for now, let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Do you have a Steam Deck? Maybe you bought the Steam Deck OLED and you want other people to know what you think about it. Let me know down below. And if you want to become one of these amazing people over here, check out the Patreon, subscribe to the LiberaPay, linked in the description down below. That's going to be it for me and... Beard. Like this.